What if you paid for a first-class seat, boarded with a valid ticket, and still got asked to leave because you didn't look the part? This isn't just about an airline. It's about the quiet power of someone who's been underestimated her whole life until she decides not to be anymore. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The air inside Southgate International Airport carried that quiet hum only early mornings could bring. Everything moved a little slower, softer. Even the coffee carts rolled more gently, and the footsteps on polished tile seemed more respectful of the hour. Claudine Mercer arrived 2 hours early, as she always did. Not because she worried about missing flights, but because she liked to watch people. Airports reminded her that everyone was going somewhere, that even strangers had stories. She made her way to the Veritas Air Lounge, reserved for first-class passengers. A young woman at the desk scanned her ticket, glanced up at Claudine's modest trench coat and knitted scarf, then forced a neutral smile. Claudine returned it, unfazed. That kind of pause wasn't new. Inside the lounge, she chose a corner chair near the window. The city hadn't yet shaken off the gray of dawn, and she liked the quiet. From her leather purse, she pulled out her husband's old silk handkerchief and laid it across her lap. It still held a trace of his cologne, sandalwood, and quiet sermons. She also carried a photograph of her son, Ezra, tucked into her novel. It showed him in his white coat, standing next to a plaque outside the oncology wing that now bore his name. He had surprised her with this trip, first class, no less, as a birthday gift after his promotion. Claudine touched the corner of the photo, smiling. "That boy," she whispered, "still spoiling his mama." The boarding call came sooner than expected. As she rose, her knees reminded her she wasn't 50 anymore. But she moved with a quiet grace, her cane clicking rhythmically on the tile. She was shown to seat 1A by the window, just how she liked it. Inside the plane, the lights were dim, the air cool and dry. She took her time getting settled, adjusting the small pillow behind her back, tucking her purse under the seat in front of her. The leather was smooth beneath her hands. She wasn't used to flying in anything other than coach. She glanced around, taking in the hushed elegance. Fresh orchids, real silverware, champagne already pouring. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel something close to joy. Then came the voice. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Claudine turned. A tall woman in a crisp Veritas Air uniform stood beside her, not smiling, not exactly rude, but not friendly either. Her name tag read Riley. Claudine nodded and reached into her purse, handing over the ticket with practiced grace. Riley took it, glanced at it, then at Claudine again. A pause. Her eyes narrowed just a hair, the way some folks do when they're trying to make a square peg fit into their round expectations. "Thank you," Riley said shortly, then walked away without another word. Claudine watched her go. It wasn't the first time she'd seen that look, that flicker of doubt, that unspoken, "Are you sure you belong here?" She had seen it in department stores, at hotel check-ins, even at her own university faculty meetings. It wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It just whispered quietly and constantly, "You're not what we expected." She didn't get angry. Not anymore. But she did feel the familiar sting, like cold air hitting an old scar. She turned back to her window, opened her book, and tried to read. But the words swam a little. Her fingers tightened slightly around the spine of the novel. Somewhere behind her, passengers were still boarding. The buzz of small talk, the shuffle of bags, the beeps from seatbelt reminders. But up here it was still, quiet, controlled. She closed her eyes for a moment. "Please," she whispered under her breath, "just let this be peaceful." The last of the passengers filed in. Overhead bins clicked shut. Flight attendants murmured in professional tones. From her seat near the front, Riley glanced back once more toward 1A. Not long. Just a glance. Claudine felt it. She didn't open her eyes. She didn't need to. She just shifted her hand slightly, resting it over her late husband's handkerchief. Claudine adjusted her seatbelt as the last few passengers filed in. The cabin still had that new airplane smell, leather, metal, a hint of coffee brewing in the galley. She pulled the small blanket over her lap, rested her hands gently on top, and took a long breath through her nose. She could feel it coming. A whisper of discomfort, not hers, but someone else's. It was in the way Riley Darnell, the lead flight attendant, was walking the aisle again. Not just checking bins or greeting passengers. She was scanning. Claudine kept her gaze on the window, watching a baggage cart crawl slowly past. She hoped it was nothing. Maybe Riley was just particular. Some flight attendants were. She'd flown enough times to know not everyone wore their authority the same way. But then the steps stopped beside her. "Ma'am," Riley said, louder this time, with a tone that had the rhythm of rehearsed politeness, but none of the warmth. "I'm afraid you're in the wrong seat." Claudine blinked slowly and turned. She met Riley's eyes with the same quiet patience she used to use on her college freshmen when they handed in excuses instead of essays. "I believe this is seat 1A, Claudine said gently. She reached into her purse and handed over the ticket, pointing to her name and the seat number. "It's right there. Dr. Ezra Mercer booked it for me, my son." Riley took the boarding pass, stared at it, then glanced back at Claudine. That pause again. Just a half-second too long. It wasn't confusion. It was doubt dressed as scrutiny. "I see," Riley said. But she didn't hand it back right away. Instead, she turned slightly and waved another flight attendant over, a younger man with tired eyes and a name tag that read Mitchell. She lowered her voice, but not enough to keep it private. "Can you double-check this?" she said. "I just want to be sure. We have to keep standards in this section." She might have been bumped up, or the system might have made an error. Mitchell glanced at Claudine, who was sitting perfectly upright, still calm, though her grip had tightened slightly on the ticket in her lap. "She's got a valid seat," he said, voice uncertain. "I think it's fine." "Please just check," Riley interrupted, more curtly this time. A few heads began to turn. The man across the aisle looked up from his newspaper. A woman 2 rows back adjusted her AirPods, now half listening. No one said anything. But the air had changed. Claudine didn't move. She didn't argue, but her face shifted. Barely. A quiet shadow passed behind her eyes. Not embarrassment, exactly. More like exhaustion. Familiarity. Riley handed the boarding pass back, but her voice didn't soften. "I'm calling our lead supervisor. Just to be sure. You understand, right?" Claudine nodded once. "Of course," she said, voice still even. "I'd expect nothing less." Behind them, in seat 3B, a man in a charcoal blazer had taken out his phone. Harlan Duvall had seen a lot in his years as a civil rights attorney, but something about the tone in Riley's voice caught his ear. That clipped precision. That doubt. He hit record, just in case. Not because he planned to use it, but because he'd learned to keep receipts. Riley returned with a tablet this time, tapping rapidly, lips pressed into a line. Mitchell hovered awkwardly behind her, eyes flicking from screen to seat and back again. "Sometimes people print fake tickets," Riley murmured, not to Claudine, but to Mitchell, loud enough. "First class gets a lot of fraud." Claudine heard it. Of course she did. She looked up at Riley. Her voice stayed calm, but there was steel behind it now. "Are you accusing me of fraud, miss?" Riley looked surprised, then flustered. No, of course not. It's just protocol." "Protocol usually includes verifying information without assumptions," Claudine replied, voice still low. More heads turned now. People were paying attention, even if they weren't speaking. Riley straightened her back. "I'll be right back," she said, and walked away quickly, leaving Mitchell standing awkwardly at Claudine's side. He cleared his throat, not meeting her eyes. "Sorry, ma'am. Sometimes things just get checked twice." Claudine didn't answer. She just turned toward the window again, pressing her lips into a firm line. Inside her chest, a quiet ache settled, one she'd carried before. She could already feel how the rest of this flight would unfold. The watchful glances, the whispers. It was supposed to be a simple flight, just 2 hours in the air. A quiet gift from a son who wanted to remind his mother she was still seen, still cherished. But things weren't feeling simple anymore. Claudine sat still, her spine straight against the leather of seat 1A. The warmth from the morning had long faded. What lingered now was something sharper, like the feeling before a thunderstorm, when the air thickens, but nothing has fallen yet. Riley returned with a supervisor badge clipped to her blazer and 2 uniformed airport security officers trailing behind her. She stopped just shy of Claudine's seat, arms crossed over her chest like she'd been preparing this moment in her mind. "Ma'am," she said, tone clipped, "we still can't verify your reservation through our onboard system. You'll need to come with us to clarify things before takeoff. You'll be reseated in coach until then." Claudine didn't move. Her hands rested calmly on her lap, still holding the boarding pass. "I already showed you my ticket," she said. "And my name is right there, Claudine Mercer. My son purchased this seat for me." "We understand, ma'am," the security guard said, stepping in with the voice of someone trying to keep things from escalating. "But if you'll just cooperate, we can sort it out without causing disruption." Claudine met his eyes. Steady, clear. "I'm not the one disrupting anything," she said. Around them, the hum of the cabin dropped to a hush. It was the kind of silence that wasn't really silent at all, just tight with tension, stretched like a string about to snap. People were listening now, even if their eyes were glued to their tray tables. Riley crossed her arms tighter, shifting her weight. "We've had instances of counterfeit upgrades," she said, too loud to be just for Claudine. "It's important we maintain the integrity of the cabin. Some passengers don't always follow standard procedure." Claudine raised an eyebrow. She could hear the word behind the words. "Some passengers," she repeated softly. "You mean people like me?" Riley blinked, as if surprised to be called out so plainly. She didn't answer. "I paid for this seat," Claudine said, more to the cabin now than to Riley, "with money my son earned as a doctor. And unless someone can prove otherwise, I'm not moving." The security guard leaned down, speaking lower now, trying to regain control. "Ma'am, if you don't come with us voluntarily, we may have to remove you by policy. We'd like to avoid that." Claudine looked up at him. Not angry, not afraid, just tired. "This is what dignity looks like," she said quietly. "Not trouble. Not disorder. Just a woman sitting where she's supposed to be." That was when Harlan Duval pressed the record button on his phone. He hadn't planned to, but something in Claudine's voice, firm, full of quiet grace, moved him. It was a sound he recognized. It reminded him of courtrooms, of protests that never made the news, of his mother. Across the aisle, a young woman with pink hair nudged her boyfriend. She pulled out her phone, hit record, and whispered, "This ain't right." Riley gave one final glance at her tablet, sighed, then turned sharply. "Move her," she told the guards. "She can resolve it from coach." One guard reached for Claudine's carry-on. The other gestured toward the back. Claudine didn't resist. She stood slowly, adjusted her scarf, and picked up the photo of Ezra that had fallen from her purse. The walk to the back of the plane was long. No one offered a word. Not then. She passed rows of faces, some embarrassed, some avoiding her gaze, others watching with wide, uncertain eyes. Only one person spoke. "Excuse me," the girl with the pink hair said softly. "We're posting this. It's not okay what they did to you." Claudine nodded. "Thank you," she said. "It's not the first time." She took her new seat by the engine, beside a man snoring into his neck pillow and a crying baby 2 rows back. It wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about something else. At the front, Riley straightened her vest, smoothed her skirt, and resumed her routine like nothing had happened. But down the aisle, videos were already being shared. And the world was about to see what the front of that plane refused to. The hum of the engines was louder in the back. Not just louder, rougher. It rattled the windows and buzzed faintly in the seat frame. Claudine sat near the wing now, surrounded by backpacks jammed under seats, knees nearly brushing the tray table in front of her. She didn't complain. That was never her way. The move had been quiet, but heavy. No kicking, no yelling, just a slow walk from the front of the plane to the back, like someone being escorted out of a room they didn't belong in. And maybe that was what stung the most. Not the downgrade, not the ache in her hip from the narrow aisle, but the feeling of being made small. She folded her hands in her lap again, the way she had in the first seat, and stared straight ahead. Her heart wasn't racing, but it wasn't steady either. People were watching, even back here. They weren't saying much, but she could feel it in the way they glanced sideways, then quickly looked away. It wasn't curiosity, it was discomfort. The plane settled into cruising altitude. The drink cart clinked up the aisle. Overhead bins rattled. Claudine didn't touch the small cup of water that was handed to her. She just kept her eyes down. Then, from the seat across the aisle, came a whisper. "They're not getting away with this," said a voice, soft but certain. Claudine turned her head. It was the young woman with the pink hair. She was holding her phone in her lap, eyes locked on the screen. "We recorded it. All of it. Me, and the guy a few rows up. He's already posted it." Claudine didn't speak right away. Her throat was tight. She just nodded. "They really thought no one would say anything," the girl added. "But people are tired. We're not letting this slide." Claudine smiled, but it was a tired smile. A sad one. "No one believes you," she said quietly, "until someone else does first." The girl blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Claudine said, adjusting her scarf, "it's one thing to be right. It's another thing to be seen." The girl looked down, like she was thinking that over. Claudine turned back to the window. Outside, the clouds looked soft and forgiving, the kind you could imagine sinking into if the world below got too loud. She thought about Ezra, about how excited he'd been to surprise her. "You'll feel like royalty, Mom," he'd said. "You deserve it." And she had. Not because of the seat, but because of the life she'd built. Because she'd raised a black son in a world that didn't always want him to succeed. And now he was saving lives every day. She hadn't even told him yet. He'd be angry, righteously, protectively angry. And she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Up front, Riley was back in her element. She handed out wine with a forced smile, checked seatbelts, nodded at men in suits. Her voice had its usual rhythm again, smooth, managerial, rehearsed. Like nothing had happened. She even laughed once, leaning in to compliment a frequent flyer on his tie. Mitchell, the younger flight attendant, passed her a tablet to sign off a checklist. Riley scribbled her name without looking. "She shouldn't have been up here," she said under her breath. "It's not personal. We just can't have people messing up the flow." Mitchell didn't respond, but something flickered behind his eyes. He took the tablet back and turned toward the galley, where he pulled out his own phone, opened the company's internal reporting app, and started typing. Back in row 24, Claudine exhaled. Not dramatically, just a long, quiet breath. Her body ached. Her heart felt like it was holding something in too long. But still, she didn't cry. She watched the girl across from her typing on her phone again. And then, like a ripple, she felt it start. The buzz. A quiet ping. The pink-haired girl looked up, eyes wide. "Ma'am," she said, turning her screen toward Claudine. "It's already at 30,000 views. And that lawyer guy? He just tagged Veritas Air in his post." Claudine didn't understand all the tech speak. She didn't need to. The look on the girl's face said enough. She leaned back in her seat just a little. "They're going to have to look at me now," she whispered to herself. Not with suspicion, with accountability. When the wheels touched down in Atlanta, Claudine felt it in her bones before she heard it in the cabin. That deep, rubber-on-concrete groan that rattled the whole frame. People stirred. Seat belts clicked. The soft voice of the pilot came over the speakers, thanking everyone for choosing Veritas Air, reminding them to check the overhead bins. Claudine didn't move right away. She waited until most had filed out. No one looked at her as they passed. Maybe a glance, maybe a quick flash of recognition, but no one spoke. Not until the girl with pink hair stopped beside her row. "You okay?" she asked, voice quiet but steady. Claudine nodded once. "We posted it," the girl continued, holding out her phone. The screen was lit up with a video already showing tens of thousands of views. A flurry of comments scrolling by. "It's getting attention. I think it's going viral." Claudine took the phone in her hand. The image of herself filled the frame, her face calm but firm, her voice clear when she said she wasn't the one disturbing the peace. It felt surreal to see herself like that, frozen in a moment she hadn't expected to matter. "I didn't think anyone saw," she whispered. "We saw," the girl replied. and people are talking. Claudine handed the phone back and offered a small, grateful smile. But something deeper stirred inside her, an ache she'd kept locked away for too long. She walked off the plane slowly, her cane tapping the ramp, each step heavier than the last. Outside the terminal, the air was thick with Georgia heat. She found a ride, slid into the back seat, and closed her eyes. The quiet didn't last. Her phone buzzed. Then again. Then again. She opened it. Messages. Calls. Emails. A flood. One headline caught her eye. Black woman removed from first-class seat despite valid ticket. Video sparks outrage. And another. Who is Claudine Mercer? The woman at the center of a viral flight discrimination video. She dropped the phone into her lap and stared out the window. "I'm not made for this," she muttered. "I'm just one woman." But then, like an echo, her own voice rang in her head. From years ago, in a lecture hall, telling a room of 20-year-olds, do the right thing, even when no one's clapping, even when no one's watching, even if you're the only one standing. She pressed her hand to her chest. And just like that, it cracked open. She wept, not because of the seat or Riley or the humiliation, but because someone had finally stood with her. Because this time, the story didn't end quietly. Later that evening, she sat in her living room, wrapped in the same shawl her husband used to call her armor. She picked up the phone and dialed Ezra. He answered on the first ring. "Mama?" There was a pause. She didn't even say, "Hello." "They moved me, Ezra," she said. "They made me walk to the back like I was nothing." She heard his breath catch on the line. "I'm so sorry," he said. "You didn't deserve that." "It's not just about me," she said, voice trembling. "It's not even about the seat. It's the way they looked at me, like I was lying, like I didn't belong, like everything I've done in my life still wasn't enough." Another pause. Then Ezra's voice, calm but firm. "Maybe, Mama, maybe it's time you told your story." Claudine closed her eyes. "Your daddy, he didn't get a story. You remember that? How the hospital made us wait. How they let him suffer because he wasn't on the right insurance plan." "I remember," Ezra said. "And I remember you didn't fight them. You just sat there quiet, holding his hand." "I didn't want to be angry," she said. "I thought dignity meant staying quiet." Ezra was quiet for a moment. "Dignity doesn't mean silence, Mama. It means standing tall, just like you did on that plane." She didn't answer, but he could hear her breathing, slow, deep, like something inside her was shifting. That night, the video passed 2 million views. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Claudine and hashtag This Is America filled social feeds. Celebrities retweeted it. Journalists started calling. People dug into Veritas Air's past, uncovering similar complaints. The airline issued a statement. "We are actively investigating the matter and will take appropriate steps." But they stopped short of naming Claudine. They didn't apologize. That only made it worse. By morning, a reporter from a national news outlet reached out, offering Claudine a platform to speak. The message ended with, "We'd be honored to help you share your truth." And then, another knock at her door. It was Harlan Duvall. He introduced himself, soft-spoken but serious, holding a copy of the Constitution folded in his jacket pocket. "I don't want to turn this into a circus," he said. "But I saw what happened, and I think the country needs to hear from you." Claudine looked at him, then at the news playing on her muted TV screen, her own face frozen mid-sentence. Maybe the seat had never really been about comfort. Maybe it was a pulpit. And maybe, just maybe, it was finally her turn to speak. The little cafe on the corner of Peachtree and Maple hadn't changed much since the 80s. Still served its coffee a little too hot, and its pie with too much whipped cream. Claudine liked it that way. Familiar, honest. A place where folks came to read the paper, not to be seen. She sat at a corner booth, hands folded over a linen napkin, watching cars slide by through the window. Her phone buzzed for the 5th time in 10 minutes. She ignored it. Across from her, Harlan Duvall stirred cream into his coffee like he was trying to smooth out something unsaid. He looked nothing like the lawyer she'd expected. No flashy watch, no briefcase. Just a man in a blue button-down and worn loafers, eyes kind but tired. My mother's name was Frances, he said, finally looking up. She died waiting for a doctor who didn't think her chest pain was serious. Said it was stress. Turns out it was a heart attack. Claudine nodded slowly. I'm sorry. He waved a hand gently. It was a long time ago, but I still remember how quiet the room was when she passed. Like even the machines gave up. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, someone honked twice and kept driving. I saw what they did to you, he continued. It wasn't just wrong, it was practiced. Like it had happened before. Like someone trained them to decide who belongs where. Claudine gave a soft laugh, dry and knowing. They've been deciding that long before Veritas Air existed. Harlan leaned in. But this time people saw it. And they're still watching. Which means you have a choice. You don't have to yell or sue or stand in front of a courthouse. But if you're willing to speak, I think people will listen. Claudine looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from weight. From memory. I never wanted attention, she said. I've lived quiet on purpose. Taught my students to listen before speaking. Raised my son to work harder, be kinder, stay out of trouble. And yet, Harlan said gently, trouble still found you. Even when you did everything right. She looked at him. He didn't flinch. Maybe I have been silent too long, she said. But if I speak now, it has to be about more than just me. I want people to know it wasn't about that seat. What was it about? She met his eyes. About worth. About being allowed to sit without having to prove you earned it. That same day, she agreed to a live interview. No lights, no makeup team, no scripts. Just a stool, a mic, and a conversation. The segment aired at 7 p.m. sharp. The anchor asked about the flight, the removal, the silence from the airline. Claudine didn't flinch. She wore a simple navy blue dress and her late husband's church brooch. I wasn't trying to make a scene, she said. But when I showed my ticket and was still asked to leave, I realized this wasn't about the seat. It was about who they thought I was, or who they didn't think I could be. The interviewer asked if she wanted an apology. Claudine smiled. An apology's only useful if it changes what comes next. Then she paused, looked straight into the camera. I didn't sit in that seat because I was special. I sat there because I had a ticket. That's it. Just like anyone else. And if that's not enough, then the problem isn't the passenger, it's the policy. The internet lit up again. Not with outrage this time, but with something heavier. Reflection. People started sharing their own stories. Tweets turned into essays. Letters poured in. A grandmother in Ohio. A teacher in Texas. A nurse in Chicago. All saying, I've been there too. Meanwhile, Veritas Air suspended Riley Darnell pending investigation. The company still hadn't issued a direct apology, but insiders leaked that their board was deeply concerned about optics. Riley, for her part, didn't go quietly. A statement from her attorney said she was following protocol and never intended offense. But the footage spoke louder. Later that night, Claudine sat on her porch with Ezra. They didn't say much. Just sipped sweet tea and listened to the hum of crickets and far-off traffic. You nervous? Ezra asked. Not anymore. He looked over at her. You sure? She nodded. Because this time I didn't whisper. I told the truth, plain and full. And that's all I ever asked my students to do. Riley watched the interview replay with her arms folded tightly across her chest. The volume was low, but every word Claudine spoke landed like a crack in a wall Riley had spent years building. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Not the quiet hallway whispers from coworkers. Not the emails with subject lines like urgent optics call or damage control. She was used to control, efficiency, protocol. And yet here she was, summoned to a windowless conference room at Veritas Air headquarters, seated across from a panel of corporate faces, none of whom met her eyes for more than a second. We've received thousands of complaints, one executive said, flipping through a printout as if it helped him hide. You're being named directly, not just in social media, but in formal reports, news outlets. I followed the handbook, Riley said, jaw tight. There was an inconsistency. I followed up. That's what we're trained to do. Another voice cut in, HR this time. Calm but firm. But the inconsistency wasn't in the passenger's documentation. It was in your assumption. Silence. Riley shifted in her seat. You think I did this because she's black, she said. That's not fair. I didn't see race. I saw behavior. The executive leaned forward. Behavior. She didn't look like a first-class passenger, Riley snapped. I've done this job for 8 years. I know the type. That was the moment it happened. The room was being recorded, standard practice for internal proceedings. And that sentence, that exact phrasing, she didn't look like a first-class passenger, was leaked by someone on the call less than an hour later. By the afternoon, it was everywhere. Clips of the original incident resurfaced, stitched with Riley's leaked comment, now playing on late-night shows and trending on every platform. People weren't just angry. They were gutted, because the issue had been named out loud. And now, it couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding. Veritas Air scrambled. Within 12 hours, they released a formal apology, public, direct, and overdue. We deeply regret the treatment of Mrs. Claudine Mercer. We are committed to reviewing our training programs, internal culture, and response systems to ensure every passenger is treated with dignity and equality. They also extended a public invitation to Claudine, asking her to join their upcoming internal conference on unconscious bias. Claudine declined the panel. She didn't want her face on a poster or her story turned into a case study. But she agreed to meet privately with the company's senior leadership. I'm not interested in being a symbol, she told them, seated across a long table in a glass office with too much air conditioning. But I am interested in systems, in accountability, in change. They nodded, scribbled notes. She continued, You want to build a better airline? Start with better questions. Why are certain faces questioned more than others? Why does silence still feel like the safest policy when something goes wrong? She stood to leave, but turned back at the door. And don't you dare call this a learning opportunity unless you actually learn. The next day, Claudine was asked if she'd meet with Riley, who had been officially dismissed but requested a final conversation. It happened in a quiet room at a neutral office downtown. No cameras, no reporters, just the two women, facing each other for the first time without uniforms or roles. Riley looked smaller without the authority, less composed. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. I didn't mean for it to go that far, she said. I believe that, Claudine replied. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. You didn't need to try. It came naturally. Riley flinched. There was a pause. Claudine leaned in slightly, not cold, but clear. I'm not here for an apology, she said. I'm here because someone thinks closure helps. Riley swallowed hard. Do you forgive me? Claudine tilted her head. If I do, it won't be because you deserve it. It'll be because I refuse to carry your hate in my heart. She stood. That seat wasn't about luxury. It was about respect. And I earned both long before you ever saw me. She walked out without another word. And in that moment, Riley understood something she never had in all her years of training. Protocol could be followed without ever doing what was right. The late afternoon sun poured through the living room window, casting quiet golden light over Claudine's modest bookshelf and the worn edge of the armrest, where she always rested her elbow. She sat curled in her favorite chair, legs tucked to the side, a stack of envelopes in her lap. Her fingers traced the torn edges of letters sent from strangers she'd never meet, people who felt like family all the same. Some were handwritten, some typed, some folded with care, others scribbled in haste. But all of them shared the same current, gratitude, reflection, a kind of aching relief. One from a high school teacher in Missouri read, I've sat in silence so many times, afraid I'd seem difficult. You reminded me that dignity doesn't need permission. Another, from a retired nurse in Detroit, simply said, It should have been me years ago. I'm glad it was finally someone like you. Claudine held them like offerings, letting their weight settle in her lap. Not heavy, but humbling. She hadn't asked for this attention, this responsibility, but it had arrived at her door like a tide. And she hadn't turned away. Outside, Birds chattered in the hydrangeas. Inside, the air was still almost reverent. Veritas Air had done what they could. They'd held a press conference, this time with real remorse behind their words. A new council was formed, focused on guest equity and frontline accountability. Claudine had been offered a symbolic position, honorary advisor, they called it. She declined the title. "I don't need my name on a plaque," she told them. "But I do want to see training schedules, policy changes, real outcomes, not just banners with better slogans." They agreed. One of the regional directors sent her a handwritten note weeks later. "You didn't ask us to feel guilty. You asked us to do better. That's harder and far more powerful." Riley, now officially terminated, didn't resurface in any headlines. Veritas made it clear she would not be rehired. The internal footage had done more damage to her case than the original video ever could. Claudine didn't feel vindicated. That wasn't the point. She scribbled in her journal that morning, "I didn't win anything. There was no trophy, no verdict. I just stood up, and in doing so, reminded them there were people they'd stopped seeing a long time ago." She wasn't a symbol. She didn't want to be one. But invitations came anyway, from libraries, universities, small community centers, asking her to speak not as an activist, but as a neighbor, a mother, a woman who'd seen enough to know what silence costs. She said yes to a few, the ones that felt real. That Sunday, Ezra came by with groceries and warm peach cobbler. He hugged her longer than usual, then set the pie down on the counter like it was something sacred. "Mama," he said as they sat together on the porch, "do you ever regret it? Saying yes to all this?" Claudine looked out at the azaleas blooming along the fence line. Their color was bolder this year, as if something in the earth had shifted. "No," she said after a long breath. "I don't regret it." She turned to him. "But I think about what would have happened if I hadn't. If I just moved seats, kept quiet. What would that have taught the girl sitting across the aisle, filming on her phone? Or the flight attendant who didn't speak up but knew better?" Ezra nodded, eyes low. "I keep thinking," she added, "if I stayed silent, someone else's daughter might be asked to move one day, not because she did anything wrong, but because she doesn't fit the picture they had in their heads." He leaned over and kissed her on the temple. Later that evening, as the crickets returned and the house dimmed, Claudine sat at her desk and picked up her pen. There were still a few letters she hadn't answered. Instead, she wrote one final note, meant not for any one person, but for everyone who'd ever been overlooked, doubted, or dismissed. To those who were ever told, "That seat's not for you. You don't need to match the room to matter inside it. You don't need permission to belong. You were worthy before they looked at you, and you'll still be worthy long after they look away. Kindness doesn't come in classes, and dignity doesn't come printed on a boarding pass." She folded the letter, sealed it, and slipped it into the envelope with no address, just the word, "forward." Sometimes it's not about making noise. It's about standing your ground with quiet dignity. Claudine didn't shout, didn't demand. She simply refused to shrink. And that was enough to shake a system. So, what would you have done in her seat? And more importantly, would you speak up if it weren't yours? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. There's more where that came from.